So thanks for joining me today. I'm Woodrow Rosenbaum. I'm the GivingTuesday Chief Data Officer. My job is to understand not just GivingTuesday, but more importantly, what it teaches us about generosity and how to motivate more giving. In case you've been living under a rock, GivingTuesday is a global generosity movement. It was launched in the US in 2012, now takes place all over the world. It's an opportunity to celebrate giving and unleash the power of people and the organizations that they care about to make change. We are now officially in over 70 countries, looking like we're on track to be in about 80 countries where there are official GivingTuesday leadership movements. But really there's GivingTuesday activity all over the world. And this is really important because it's not a typical giving day. GivingTuesday is really an open source movement and a platform for generosity, and it's created by the people who participate in it. And this is one of the things that made it really difficult to measure, and one of the reasons why we really started these efforts in the first place. Context right now, of course, is that we're in a pretty unprecedented moment. Things are tough and we're in the midst of crisis. And as we navigate that as a global community and as a GivingTuesday community and team, we've really felt that our core belief in our theory of change really is built around this belief that generosity has the power to shift communities for the better and to make a difference in people's everyday lives. And that's only that much more true during crisis. Most of you probably saw that we stood up an initiative called GivingTuesday Now, really on very little notice as our response to the COVID crisis. And we're really felt that it was a real validation of the model of this distributed network of givers. We had activity in more than 145 countries, extraordinary response from the public, from organizations, from institutions, from companies in a very short time, ramping up or catalyzing existing action. We learned a lot of money was donated, a lot of action was taken, a lot of new networks were built in a very short period of time. And we're working now actively to use that as a learning moment to understand what this tells us about the opportunities, the risks, and our ability to navigate the current crisis as a social sector and come out the other side with a positive legacy as much as is possible. I'll be talking about that a little bit, but really I'm going to be talking more broadly today about the questions that we've been asking and answering in our global data commons. So our data commons is a collaborative effort. There are now more than 70 donation platforms, payment processors, and aggregators of data and others collaborating with us in the US. One of the outcomes of GivingTuesday Now was we actually have more than 50 platforms that we're onboarding into this collaboration process now. There really does seem to be a renewed, an unprecedented interest in collaboration and collective action right now. We need to help one another to navigate this crisis, and we're really seeing that with a lot of interest and support for our data collaborative in the US. We also have teams in 47 countries that we're working with to help build their capacity, leverage the work that we're doing, and work together to understand generosity, support each other's work, and get a broader perspective and picture of what motivates giving and what it looks like in different places. In some cases, it really is about building capacity. In other places, it's about leveraging new perspectives and new resources in places outside the United States. So over the last year, we've really been thinking a lot about the questions that we're asking and that are guiding our work. And one of the things that really became clear is that asking the right question makes a really big difference in setting you on a path of success. And that sort of operates in a few different ways. And so I was reflecting late last year on the questions we were asking and on the nature of those to sort of shape the direction of the work that we were doing. And your first question might be, why is there a picture of a baby? And one of the reasons for that is that our research showed pretty clearly that the most compelling image that you could show people in a story about giving, about a charitable organization, are pictures of kids and children, kids and babies. And so this picture of the baby is here so that you'll believe what you're going to hear next. Also, kids and questions are an interesting thing. It's estimated that children between the age of 2 and 5 will ask about 40,000 questions. And I know that as a parent, that seems like a pretty low estimate. And it's been known for a long time that questions are a really important way that children learn about their environment, and that the asking of questions helps them form connections in their brain. That's not surprising, I'm sure, to anybody. What's been found more recently is that that's not just a thing for kids, that in fact, adults also, questions play a really important role in how adults process information. And that when we ask a question, it actually changes the pathways and the mechanisms that we engage in our brain to process information. So questions really do have a profound effect. And that includes when you ask the wrong question. And the other reason that there's a picture of a baby here is that there's an interesting thing happened with one of the largest diaper brands in the world. My background is in commercial marketing. This is the kind of thing we think about a lot. This diaper brand wanted to understand what are the most important factors for people when they're choosing a diaper. And what they found very clearly, unequivocally, was the most important factor to people in choosing a diaper is absorbency. That's the thing they care about the most. And so that diaper brand, and you may have seen the ads, really messaged about absorbency. And yet they lost market share. And so when they went back to look at that in more depth, what they found was that although that is the most important factor, by and large, people trust the top diaper brands to be absorbent. And so if you message about that, you're not really telling anybody anything, and you're not differentiating yourself from your competition. And this is why we get pictures of Mickey Mouse on a diaper, or easy close tabs, or elastic leg openings like this. These are the things that differentiate brands. And this is really important, I think, learning for the nonprofit sector, because sometimes we're asking that wrong question about what's important to a donor and engaging them. And that's not always the right way to go. So the next idea here that I think is really interesting around questions is that often questions just are really important, pragmatic, and most of what we're going to talk about are really sort of practical questions that we've asked and how that led us to answers, and how those answers led us to more questions, which is exactly the kind of path we want to be on when we're doing research. Questions can be more sort of elevating and inspiring than that as well. And I wanted to give this example because this is Jennifer Land Dubois and her father, Edwin. And when Jennifer was 3 years old in 1943, her dad took a picture of her at the beach. And she asked her father, "Why can't I see the picture now?" And that question inspired Edwin to invent Polaroid film. So now, not all the questions we're going to ask, in fact, most of the questions we ask are not going to be so transformative and lead to incredible breakthroughs that change entire industries. But I think it really is illustrative of how important asking the right question is. So I'm going to talk about some of the questions we've asked. I'm going to talk about how they've led us to other answers, and where that's leading us from here. So some of this, I noticed that some of you have seen some of my stuff before. So some of this will be review for you. As I said, feel free to jump in with any questions. Emily, who's on, is helping me and will flag anything so I can cover it as we go. I think we're a small enough group that we can get a little bit of a dialogue going if there are questions about the content. The other thing I'd like you to think about as we're going through this is, what questions might you ask to guide your own work moving forward? What question might set you on the right path, including thinking about, are you asking the right question now? Or maybe you're asking the question from the wrong angle, like that diaper brand was. So if you can think about that, I'd love to hear from you in the Slack channel, what kinds of questions are guiding your work. That would really help us. What questions you'd love to answer, or that you'd love answers to as well. So not just questions about the content, questions about your work and giving and generosity would be really interesting to me as well. So get in the Slack channel, help us out there. We'd appreciate that. So our first question, what we asked right at the beginning, the whole purpose for starting this data work was, how much money is being donated on GivingTuesday? And at the time, initially, a number of years ago, this was really just about online giving. That's what we felt we could capture. We knew GivingTuesday was a big online donation experience, so we wanted to find out how many dollars are being donated. And the answer was, there's quite a lot going on. It's been growing year over year. What has shifted as of 2019, what's new, is that we developed a new model for measuring offline donations. And this is another really important example of how a subtle change to a question can really make a difference, because measuring offline giving on a single day is actually pretty hard. And there's been lots of attempts at getting at this, and it's been a real challenge because there just frankly aren't good records of how much offline giving happens altogether. We can look at it on an annual basis pretty well, maybe even quarterly. You start getting down below that, it's really difficult. And measuring on a day was not really something that any of us really considered achievable. So we changed the question. We changed the question from how much money is being donated offline on GivingTuesday to what's the lowest possible limit of dollars that were donated online on GivingTuesday. And that allowed us to develop new methodology. I think that methodology is really important because now we can apply those models to other times of the year. We can see shifts in behavior. We can look at how the market is changing. We suddenly get a lot of visibility to stuff that we never got before. And that's really important. It's not the total amount that was given, it's the minimum amount that was given. It's a slight change to that question. The answer is, altogether, we saw about 1.97, just under $2 billion donated. Most of that offline. Although GivingTuesday is big online, offline giving is still bigger on GivingTuesday, just like all year long. We would not have been able to get to that low level limit if we had been stuck on knowing exactly the number of dollars that were donated on the day. So we validated pretty early that GivingTuesday is big. We have a better sense of how big it is now. At least $2 billion donated in a single day in the United States last year, and that's really useful to know. What became clear pretty quickly was we needed more of an impact understanding, right? So it's fine if people are having a big day. We wanted to know, is it actually generating a net lift? Because if all we're doing is moving money around the calendar, that's not very useful. I mean, it's not necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily helpful. Our data providers at the time, about 42 large donation platforms and payment processors and data aggregators, shared data with us that we aggregated together, and were able to do a statistical model to validate that, yes, in fact, GivingTuesday is generating a net lift. So that was clear, and it really then set the stage for understanding more in depth, what does that mean? What's behind that? What more do we need to know in order to make some sense over what that means in terms of best practice? But one of the clear things that illustrates is that we think that donor fatigue really is not a problem. In fact, it's probably not a thing, because here what we're seeing is that it is in fact possible to reactivate donors. In fact, 3/4 of givers on GivingTuesday in aggregate are giving again to a cause that they already supported. So they're not tapped out. It's obviously possible to get them to give more for a net positive result. So that's really important. The other thing we're seeing is that although, as I said, most GivingTuesday giving is offline, Giving Tuesday online is growing faster than the baseline. So we see online giving growing every day of the year, but it's growing faster on Giving Tuesday than it is at those other times. So this chart is a clean, fairly representative sample of online giving year over year. And these big spikes are, that's not the spike. Sorry, these big spikes are the end of year, December 31, biggest day for giving. Also biggest day for giving online until we get to 2016. And then these dark blue lines, this is Giving Tuesdays. And by 2017, Giving Tuesday is bigger for number of donations than December 31st. So I think this is really important to see that this growth is happening. In fact, I think a couple of things that we've seen in the data really suggest that Giving Tuesday is driving organizations more online. It's getting them to embrace online giving. It's actually driving the overall growth in online giving, as well as extending the giving season. One of the big challenges in deciding what the baseline amount of offline giving was on Giving Tuesday is that what is a typical day at the end of November is different today than it was in 2012. And that seems to be the one of the effects of Giving Tuesday kind of stretching this giving season for one of the reasons why we see that net positive result on an annualized basis. So from there, we wanted to understand how are people participating in this moment, right? So we can see that the donation dollars are coming in, it's having a net positive effect, that's great. How are the people engaging with this? And this is, again, I think a really important thing to understand, and that is that the vast majority of people who participate are doing taking more than one action. Most donors also do something else. And in fact, only giving money on Giving Tuesday is the least common behavior. So non-monetary giving is a big part of this. And I think when you look at that, this is US data. It's true everywhere we measured. The primary experience of Giving Tuesday varies from place to place. In a lot of places, it's primarily driven by financial donation, but in all those cases, people are doing more things than just that. And that's despite the fact that most of the ask on Giving Tuesday is monetary. So we see when we democratize this experience, when we put agency in the hands of the givers, it turns out that they want to take lots of different actions. I think that's important for us to understand as we engage for support, and particularly in the current crisis, that people are looking for those experiential engagements, less transactional. One of the things that's different is we asked ourselves in 2019 if how many people are taking action. It's easier to see the number of people who give money. It's harder to see the number of people who take other actions, and we were able to get some figures there. So again, with some new methodology at taking the same approach at looking at what the lowest limit was, we're looking at an estimate of at least 27 million US adults participating. That's 13% of the population choosing to do something for Giving Tuesday. Lots of overlap, again, between those modes of behavior and the things that they're choosing to do, including 7.6 million of them volunteering in some way. The other thing that we're seeing is that Giving Tuesday is engaging younger donors. So this 18 to 34-year-old group, the millennials, quote unquote, this is interesting. I guess millennials are actually a little older than 18 now, but it's interesting because this is a demographic that a lot of organizations are having trouble tapping into. And yet they're the ones that are really showing up and driving a lot of this Giving Tuesday engagement. And so we thought, when we look a little bit closer at their behaviors and attitudes, we see some interesting things because they kind of get, everyone knows that they get a bad rap for being disengaged or not interested. It turns out that we're finding that they actually have much more positive attitudes about giving. They're more likely to say they trust nonprofits. They're more likely to say that it's important to give back, and they're more likely to say they enjoy giving. These are all attitudes that are correlated very highly with donation behavior. Now, there are a lot of things that suppress their behavior, and a lot of those things are more or less outside our control. But I think it's also worth noting that these donors, although they say it's important, are less likely to report that they make it a priority. And I think that the learning there is that we need to be more proactive when engaging younger donors. We need to give them lots of ways to give back because that's how they're choosing to get involved. It's how they can feel a part of what's happening instead of just like a transaction. They're more inclined to monthly giving. So this is all painting a picture for how to engage this donor that looks a lot like how GivingTuesday operates. One of the interesting things as well, we don't have a lot of data on younger than 18, mostly just because it's more expensive to get data on kids. But QGive did some interesting research, and they found that the majority of Gen Z respondents were aware of GivingTuesday. At 52%, they were the lowest in the survey group. But still, most of them had heard of GivingTuesday. 58% of those who were aware had given money. This is Gen Z, right? These are the youngest donors in the survey. The youngest people in the survey had a fairly high awareness of GivingTuesday and very high financial donation behavior. This is really important to understand. As we see giving consolidating into these older, more wealthy donors, and we're not seeing the behavior we want from younger donors, the attitudes are there. They'll respond when they're approached. It's incumbent on us to take the learnings from GivingTuesday and apply it to these cohorts. So one of the things we saw when we talked to GivingTuesday donors was that the majority of them report that they are inspired to give more by GivingTuesday. So we wanted to see how their giving is actually impacted. And we looked first at existing donors. It's 75% of the donations are from people supporting an organization they've supported in the past. And what we found was that after their first GivingTuesday donation, these donors fairly dramatically increased the frequency and value of their donation. So we broke them down into cohorts. So what you're seeing here highlighted are the donors who gave their first GivingTuesday gift was in 2015, and they'd been giving for years prior. And this is the group that was donating up to $400 a year. We also saw the same effect in the higher level donors. And this is what we see for every single cohort. After that first GivingTuesday donation, a big increase in their value to those same organizations. The other thing we looked at was GivingTuesday acquired donors. And in our data aggregated from many different sources, as well as from some of our partners, you're seeing an example from Classy. What we found was that donors acquired on GivingTuesday were more likely to stay loyal to the organizations that acquired them. They were more likely to be retained. They were more likely to give again. In Classy's case, they found that they were, with the exception of disaster relief, more likely to start a fundraiser for an organization. So these donors are really highly valuable. I will tell you that I expected the opposite. I expected us to have to factor in a higher defection level amongst these donors. I thought that the retention levels would be lower on GivingTuesday donors. And so for us, we're seeing, oh, this is really interesting. GivingTuesday is clearly quite sticky. What we're working on now is trying to understand better what's generating that positive effect. This GivingTuesday effect is being driven, at least in part, by how, and if not entirely, by how these donors are being engaged by those organizations. So we're really interested in understanding better how are they being engaged, what is the messaging, what kind of frequency, what channels are they using, how is this effect being generated. So the next thing, so now we've seen kind of how GivingTuesday is affecting people's giving. We wanted to understand that and contextualize that a little bit. So we've been looking at how people give more generally, the modes of giving, their attitudes and behaviors. We had a few questions we wanted to ask, in part because we wanted to validate some of the assumptions that we're seeing in the sector. So the first thing we were looking at is this question of offline versus online donors. And if you look at the data initially, you go, well, yeah, some donors look more offline and some look more online, and offline is more valuable. And certainly giving by check delivers the most money. That's quite clear. And if you, not surprisingly, look at the landscape, you'll find that online and newer emerging technologies and crowdfunding tends to skew younger. and more traditional methods tend to skew older. But despite the fact that more of the money comes in by check in the US, you know, I showed this slide in Sweden and people were like, what do you mean check? And I had to explain that I meant writing the amount on a piece of paper and sending it in the mail. And they just thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. But despite the fact that in the US, giving by check is delivering the most money, giving by check and giving online directly into a nonprofit, on a nonprofit's website is exactly as popular a behavior. So the donors, in fact, who are most valuable are taking lots of different action in support of organizations. And this idea that the mode is a driver is really kind of misplaced. And so I think as we see more online adoption, we'll see that grow. The current situation, I know from our platform partners, is really driving a lot of new adoption. I think we'll see that gap between offline and online really, the shrinking of that gap really accelerate. Another question we asked here was, how are people giving to personal crowdfunding campaigns versus charitable giving to registered charities? And first of all, you have to split this up by age cohort to really see the difference, because there's big differences in how much people give based on age. But the really important finding here is that the people who participate in these crowdfunding campaigns for personal causes, like somebody's cat's surgery, they're actually more inclined to give more to registered charities. And what we see is that they rate much higher on the typical attitudes and values that correlate with greater giving. They're more likely to say they trust nonprofits. They're more likely to say that they were raised to give back. They're more likely to say they enjoy giving. All of these things that are correlated with greater giving. And so really, I think we should be looking at this much differently than there are replacement behaviors. We're not in this scarcity situation that we think we are. Now, we may be entering into a recession. I'll talk about that in a minute. Certainly reduces the capacity that people have to give. But we're not realizing their total capacity to give. And it's not because they're giving somewhere else. The generous people give, and that's our customer. And we should be thinking about and celebrating all their forms of generosity, because that's what raises the total impact, the total level of behavior. And we should be thinking about, what is it about these personal crowdfunding campaigns that really inspire people? The fact that the biggest crowdfunding companies are moving into charitable giving in a really big way is because they see that as the way to provide credible causes to donors. They're not looking at it as the donors only have so much to give and they're tapped out and we can only ask them so much. They want more supply for those donors to respond to. And we can learn something in the nonprofit sector about that that's really, really important. The other thing, and this I think might be connected to the surprise that I had in finding that that GivingTuesday acquired donors are retained at a higher level, because my assumption was, and I think a lot of people made this assumption, that it's a more reactive environment, it's a more knee-jerk response, and so we would see lower retention rates. It's interesting, GuideStar shows a spike in searches about organizations on GivingTuesday. And every year that's bigger and bigger. And that really, I think, is important to understand, that those GuideStar searches are people looking for information about organizations and their missions and their use of funds. People are thoughtful about their giving on GivingTuesday. And so it's not to say that one is better than the other, but I do think it's interesting to see that this is the time when the most research is being done into organizations, in this moment where we're thinking about our generosity. So the last sort of section here is, we've been thinking about why do people give, and understanding these drivers and motivations. And there's been some recent findings here from our work that I think are important to understand. First is what we're calling philanthropic sentiment. And we're finding that, and this is not going to surprise anybody, But the more inclined people are to giving, the more likely they are to say it's important to give back, the more likely they are to get involved in active participation in Giving Tuesday and giving behaviors. That, again, is not surprising. What's interesting is we are seeing that there's a clear connection between the Giving Tuesday brand and those attitudes and the behaviors. And last year, what we observed a positive shift in sentiment in some of the countries where Giving Tuesday is active. Now, we're not sure what's going on there, but we're beginning to develop a model for understanding those drivers. And the expectation is, and the data support that there's a kind of a push and a pull going on there. That the higher philanthropic sentiment is good for Giving Tuesday to kind of develop on fertile ground, and that Giving Tuesday inspiring people and increasing their donation and giving behavior over time is also positively affecting that philanthropic sentiment. So this is what we're looking at now, is what is the relationship, but more importantly than just Giving Tuesday's relationship there, what we want to know is what are those other drivers. And there are some clues here to what may be going on Giving Tuesday. Horizon Media did a study and found that that a little over half of the people who were surveyed who had participated in Giving Tuesday said they did it because they wanted to be part of a bigger group of people doing good. And I think that now there were lots of reasons people got involved. This was by far the biggest. And I think that's really important to understand, that it's an opportunity for people to act within their communities and act locally and come together for and with the people where they are, but also feel like they're part of something big. And as we look at our Giving Tuesday Now response to COVID, we really saw a very, very strong theme around community and community support and coming together. And we really think that that's kind of the secret sauce. Gives people agency, makes them feel like they're making a difference, right? And we know that that's important. We think that that's part of what's going on here. This is research from Sector 3 Insights, which I think is pretty stark and shows one of the things we really have to pay attention to. They looked at the drivers of intention to donate, and here's how they ranked. And urgency was the #1 driver of donation intention, which is interesting. It's useful to know. You'll see trust is there, not at all at the top. Trust is critical to get a donation, but it's not a trigger of donation. And it's important to understand the difference. The other thing is that Sector 3 looked at how charities are ranking on these drivers, and this is what they found. Oops. The most important drivers of donation intention are at the bottom of the ranking. Charities are not, by and large, delivering well on these most important drivers. The ones that are, it's a very linear correlation. The ones that are doing much better at driving that intention to donate. And I think this really speaks to what we need to do in order to address our current situation. We need to engage people. We're coming up on a real economic pressure. We can expect individual giving to be suppressed overall. Diversity and a sense of urgency are key. And by urgency, doesn't necessarily mean an emergency all the time. Giving Tuesday is one of those things that introduces urgency. If you want to be part of the greater group of people doing good, then you got to give as part of Giving Tuesday. And at the same time, we're seeing, just like Black Friday, is this lengthening of that urgency environment, and where you get multiple opportunities to take action against it. And so that's the win here, and how we're going to, I think one of the ways we need to weather this crisis and come out stronger is by thinking in those terms of how we continue to provide urgency, but in lots of ways, celebrating giving and giving people more than just monetary donations as a way of responding. And all this to say is that we kind of really see this as generous people are generous. And I mean, it sounds obvious, but you know, so often we look at this and we go, that person gave, I better not ask them again. And we're maybe again asking the wrong question when we're thinking about how to engage. We're asking, how often should I ask, instead of how should I be asking? And that's really important to understand, is that if we're not If our message is not welcome, if it's a burden, then that's the problem. Not that we're delivering it too often. We need to be thinking about how we're engaging, and we're hopefully that these questions and answers are helping to paint a picture of what the best practice looks like. And so to get to that in more depth, here are some of the questions that we're asking now in order to uncover that. So first of all, we're looking at, and this has really been accelerated in our roadmap because of the current situation, we're looking at what are the economic indicators of monetary giving. We don't necessarily think that the past shocks to the system are really predictive. But what we do think is that if we identify what those indicators are, that we can look for that signal in the data moving forward, so we can identify where are those opportunities and risks coming. And then, as I mentioned, we see this Giving Tuesday effect, and it's frankly not very well understood. We have lots of hypotheses, so we want to understand that better. What are the factors that are generating that Giving Tuesday effect? Not because we want to maximize Giving Tuesday, not because we want to optimize it, although obviously we do, but more importantly, so we can say, this is what's working that you can do every day when you engage support. These are the things, the best practices that we can adopt in order to be successful, in order to weather the storm, in order to come out stronger. Because although there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of threat, the fact is people are giving almost like never before. There's this upswelling of support. And what we want to do is figure out, how do we tap into that for a change in behavior and culture moving forward? But part of that has got to be a change in practice, because most donations are solicited. And so when we measure donor behavior, we're largely measuring fundraiser behavior. So we need to figure out what's working here that we can apply more broadly. And then going out, sort of taking the next layer of the onion out, we're looking at what are the indicators of greater generosity. So we're interested in how we measure various generosity behaviors and other pro-social behaviors, how they impact various measures of civic engagement, things like voting, other things that are about expressing your agency within your community. We want to see how these intersect and interact. And what are the indicators of growth in overall generosity and its impact. Our hypothesis here is that generosity is a driver of positive change. We want to validate that and understand how and why. And then related to that is this pragmatic, like the drivers of this philanthropic sentiment. So we know that it's highly important in identifying how people are going to behave. We know that we can see that it can be shifted. We want to understand what are the factors that shift that. How can we take intentional action to move toward that toward that higher philanthropic sentiment that underlies those positive behaviors. So we have a million other questions, but that's kind of what's on our immediate agenda right now. I want to go to your questions because we got a little bit of time to cover that. And I'll just say, just in my last word on questions, going back to Jennifer and her dad and this idea of a question that is straightforward, but really can result in something extraordinary. In 2012, the founders of Giving Tuesday had a simple question: what if we had a day for giving? And it turns out the answer to that question is really profound, right? It's people in every country of the planet come together to celebrate generosity and support the causes that they care about in a growing wave of giving that transforms people's lives and their communities. And that was not the goal. When Henry and Asha talked about this, they just thought, what if we have a day for giving? And really glad they did, because it's a pretty fun gig. So with that, I'm going to see if we have any questions that we can take from our participants. So has anybody hit the chat, or maybe I'll just stop sharing here. Feel free to unmute yourself. We're a small group. I'm happy to talk about any of these findings. I'd love to know what it means to you and what questions you might be asking to guide your own work. What do you guys want to know? Or is there any of that wasn't clear that you'd want to go into more detail on? Okay, well, it sounds like there aren't any questions, so we'll give you your last 15 minutes back. I'm here, I'm on the Slack channel. Somebody's unmuting themselves. Eva?
Hi there. Sorry with the tech, I'm a little slow. So say more about, I think it sounds like you're posing the next level questions, right? Drivers and factors. What are some examples of drivers and factors that you're already seeing maybe in the data?
Yeah, great question. So I think, first of all, what's clear is that multiple points of engagement is really important. What's less clear is for which ones for whom when, right? So yes, it's really important to give people volunteering opportunities is going to make a difference. What we don't know is what's the right entry point for different supporters at different times. So we need to kind of understand that much better. And my guess is I would be very surprised if it's one size fits all, right? So that segmentation is going to be really critical in understanding that. Driver of the behavior is philanthropic sentiment. Participation seems to drive sentiment. So that's a nice virtuous cycle. We need to break that down in a lot more depth to know. And then just looking at that donation intention, urgency is the #1 driver. You have to give people a reason to act now. As a commercial marketer, that doesn't surprise me. We already know that, right? If you like, and I understand, like fundraisers are often worried, like, well, I don't want to shut them down. What if they're not ready to give now? And if I say you have to give now, well, then I'll lose tomorrow's donation. Worry about tomorrow's donation tomorrow. It really makes a much bigger difference. You got to give somebody a reason that they have to act. And we have compelling, emotional, engaging stories to tell, which commercial marketers would drool over, right? So really leverage that every day. Great question.
Thank you. And I don't need to hog the stage, but I'm curious about the, it's such a big shift right now where, in a way, fundraising online was not like optional. Clearly, we were moving there, but it was complementary to other activities.
Right.
In a matter of a couple of months, it's become the sole vehicle. Right. And I'm curious whether you're getting any questions or like, what is the need from nonprofits that are still making the shift, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I hear it from the volunteer platforms and from TechSoup and from Neon One and Donor Perfect, like people who were doing offline, had events, are just like scrambling now to replace that. Offline is down, online is up, percentage-wise, almost equally maybe, which is a terrible story because percentage-wise, right, we've got, if we're down 10% in offline and up 10% in online, that's a problem because that's, right, that's only, that 10% in online is only going to count for like 1% of maybe 2% of the decline in offline. So yeah, people are scrambling. In addition, we know that the need is greater. We know that that the capacity just to handle things is reduced. Like it is absolutely critical right now. I mean, all I can say is I do think that one of the things that this is doing is it's forcing some people into best practice, and we will see a shift. The nonprofit sector is by and large pretty resilient to economic shocks comparatively. That's small consolation if your nonprofit ceases functioning. and I get that, like that, and we also, although, well, we can expect not all subsectors of the nonprofit sector to fare as well as others, right? And certainly the more reliant right now you are on earned revenue, the harder it is to make that up in other ways. There are some encouraging bright spots. We are seeing people think about their arts organizations and the small businesses in their community when they're giving right now, that they're thinking about who's in their community and they're giving to those organizations, not just people making masks. But that resilience is going to be, I mean, at the end of the day, we just have to do what we can do best, right? And so diversifying your donor base, diversifying the ways that they could engage with you, going after donor advised funds, which were very resilient to the last recession when they were a tiny fraction of the size they are now, right? So, and then telling your story, how you're part of the healing, how you're important, and why you need it. And frankly, it's not that hard to get into online fundraising now, right? Like there are tools. If you have an internet connection, I mean, there's a digital divide and it's real, but it's probably less real for the organizations than it is for some donor groups. So I really think at the end of the day, grab a website and talk to your community.
And you got some good questions on chat.
Yeah. We're going to use, I'm going to read it so that I know what it says. How do you see the prospect visits evolved after this pandemic? I work at a university and gift officers haven't been able to visit their, oh, I see, yeah. Zoom calls have been useful. Some donors are just not used to Zoom calls and do not feel comfortable to meet this way. Yeah, right. I mean, this is part of the problem of being in an environment where we've been, we've been working what works every day and not diversifying our approach. And one of the things that's similar to that is we have a real problem of consolidation of the giving in fewer and fewer hands. On every day of the year except Giving Tuesday, fewer people doing more of the giving. But if you ask a room full of fundraisers who they're asking, the description of who they're asking is not very different, right? So it turns out if you ask these people, they give $2 billion on Giving Tuesday in a single day. That's more than any foundation other than the Gates Foundation gives in a year, right? Unrestricted funds. We haven't been asking these people, and then we're worried that they're not showing up. Yeah, prospects I think really the key thing is going to be getting creative with your prospects. If you're talking about a prospect that you would meet face to face, then I say, think about how you can engage them in your mission in a meaningful way right now. That doesn't require them to be in person, obviously. I mean, it'd be great if you could get them to show up and volunteer, but you can't. So I would suggest thinking about how am I going to make them part of this solution, give them agency to act, give them lots of options. If they're not comfortable with Zoom, give them some other way to engage with you. Give them a toolkit. Ask them to be advocates, right? People put their money where their mouth is. Do you think there's a need to quantify or focus more on the time and volunteer tracking beyond monetary contributions? 100%. Since 2012, have you been able to track donor behaviors post-natural? Yes. So, yeah. Yes, we've looked at natural disaster giving. Yes, it is more short-lived. The retention rates are not as good, and they're certainly much higher for those Giving Tuesday acquired donors. In fact, in the moment, Giving Tuesday looks a lot like a natural disaster for the immediate response. Mexico just did their own analysis, looked at the previous year. There were 9 big spikes. Giving Tuesday was the Giving Tuesday was the 9th biggest spike in giving in that year. The rest were all natural disasters. What's interesting is that those natural disaster donors don't last as long. Those Giving Tuesday donors are retained much higher, although not just higher than natural disaster donors, higher than baseline. Yeah, we've looked at that. I mean, I think it's going to be pretty tricky to retain those donors, but at least once you've got them in your network, I think I'd be looking at converting to monthly as my primary objective, but I mean, that's pretty tactical. Data seems to be suggesting that we are going into a slump after a giving surge. How do you think organizations should handle the next few months? Do you predict that a recovery will come in the next few months, or still too early? Yes, too early to tell. The fact is, this is so unpredictable. This is so different than anything else, both for better and worse, that I don't have any predictions, except that I do expect we will be in an economic crisis. And I think people's overall capacity to give will be reduced. On the other hand, I'm very convinced we have not been tapping the full capacity of donors to give. They've got way more money in their donor advised funds than they ever had, and they're more motivated to give than ever before. So we've got these two things in tension. I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be really tough for a lot of sectors and a lot of specific types of organization. What I think I'd be doing now is, first I'd be identifying every donor who has a donor advised fund. I'd be going after every one of my donors who has a donor advised fund. I'd be going after donor advised funds. And I would be thinking about all of the ways that I can engage people beyond just asking them for money. And I think that's going to be one of the best ways to get some dollars out of people, and to maintain that relationship that you need. Build new relationships that you're going to need in order to come out of this and recover strong. How much of the Giving Tuesday effect is because of the fact that it's on a single day, whereas other nonprofits yeah. So I do, as I said, I think that urgency to act is part of it. We're seeing the shoulders of Giving Tuesday grow, on the other hand. And I'm, my commercial marketing experience, I think there's lots of room to have lots more urgent days to act. And one of the things that's been interesting in May is we stand up Giving Tuesday now, and there's a bunch of spring giving days, and to see them leverage this opportunity and do even better than they expected, I think there's room to have more days. And I'm reminded of when I was going to the Giving Tuesday UK launch last year. And I was in the elevator on my way up, and there were these just two colleagues, they worked somewhere else in the building, coming back from lunch, and she had shopping bags, and he said, "Oh, I see you were out at the sale, out shopping at lunch." And she says, "Oh yeah, it's dangerous to let me out when the sales are on." And he said, "Oh, I thought the sales were more in June." And she said, "No, they're every day." And I thought, that's it, right? Like I know that my commercial marketer side, my commercial clients, the number of one-day sales they can have in a year is 365. Every one of your engagements is only going to reach a fraction of your possible audience, and only a fraction of them are really going to register, and a fraction of them are going to give. You've got another day tomorrow. It requires lots of creativity. It requires lots of diversity in the engagement, but 100% you can create more of those opportunities in an ongoing dialogue that really help to create that experience. And just, again, don't think about it as asking. Think about it as engaging. It's not that you shouldn't have a call to action. Of course you should, but you need variety in there. Yeah, and Yash, I know you've got good products for helping people figure out how to do that.
Thank you.
How can we follow your research? Great question. We've got like 3 minutes left here. So on the Giving Tuesday website is the Giving Tuesday Giving Lab, which right now is a pretty limited blog with some search functionality, but we are blowing that up with a brand new publishing platform. All our research, lots of other people's research, all searchable and cross-referenceable, access directly to the database that's behind that. We're going to continue to publish our own and other people's research into it. We're developing an API so people can take feeds from that research and other storytelling about giving and case studies and best practices and toolkits, and either just access it or share it on their own site. So all of that will be built out, but right now it's on the Giving Lab on givingtuesday.org, and you'll see we've got a whole bunch of stuff. We're right now looking at what's happening in the sector, what are the trends in giving, what does it look like since January, doing social listening. We're understanding what people are talking about, how that translates into action. Thank you for putting the link in the Slack channel, Emily. We are putting this together to understand and create dashboards for measuring the reality of that we're in, the opportunities to mitigate, and the road to recovery. And we'll be doing seminars and workshops and publishing like crazy to help you with actionable insights on how to do that. Giving Lab is the place to find it. Thank you for having questions. I would love to hear about the questions that will guide your work, the questions that you think you need to be answered. The answers you need are our mission. So feel free to throw them in the Slack channel. Is the best way to stay in touch and let us know what we should be thinking about. And thank you all for your time and have a great Giving Tuesday.